Hello and welcome everyone to the Fireside Chat here in the Gridcoin Discord. We do this every Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern, midnight UTC. It's basically just a podcast where we talk everything Gridcoin. This week, we have the Testnet coordinator with us, Barton26. Hello, Barton.
Hello.
And he will be giving us a little rundown about Testnet, what it is, how to join up, why we need it, and all that good stuff. So if you are new to crypto and Gridcoin in particular, definitely stay tuned and we'll be getting to that. Otherwise, we are here as myself, Jay Ringo, and Chocolate. Hey, Chocolate.
Hi.
And Goblin, we locked him outside because it just felt like the right thing to do. So he's not here this week.
Choo-choo.
So before we get into the testnet, let's go over any news in Gridcoin this week. If anyone can think of anything that they want to bring up, please do. The two main topics are the two major polls going on right now. We have the white paper poll, which is finishing up April 20th, which is tomorrow when we're recording, but by the time you are listening to this, the poll will probably be done, and the paper will likely, with any luck, be hosted on the gridcoin.us website, so keep an eye out for all that news. And the other one is the CBR economics proposal, where we are choosing the block reward for staking a block for when we switch to constant block reward mechanism. So this week we've got Testnet coordinator Barton here with us, and we're just gonna throw it over to him. If anyone here has any questions as he's talking, feel free to type them out in the chat. But we're just gonna talk about Testnet and learn from Barton, who has had quite a bit of experience organizing everyone on it and helping it grow to what it is right now. So take it away, Barton.
All right. So first off, I wanted to start with the basics. Really, what is Testnet, right? Because to a lot of people, coming into the scene, particularly who don't know a lot about cryptos, they don't really know what Testnet is. Most cryptocurrencies out there have their own testnets, and Gridcoin is no exception. Testnet is, to put it plainly, a sort of clone of the mainnet blockchain that is used for testing purposes. Gridcoin's testnet operates under almost the same parameters as the mainnet in terms of coin production, in terms of integrating with BOINC. It has a super block system, all the things you see, just with some additional tools that allow us to monitor and test easier. One thing to note is that our testnet is a lot smaller than our mainnet, and this is largely due to having a lot less people. Versus the thousands on mainnet, testnet has usually somewhere between 50 and 100 people on it at any given time. Currently, testnet has about 530,000 blocks compared to production's 1.2 million. So it is a little bit smaller. So that leads into, well, what is testnet used for? Well, obviously we want to use testnet to test. Anyone who's worked in software development knows that the last thing you want to do when developing software is take your newly coded solution and release it out into the wild. And when we're working with blockchain and cryptocurrency and things involving people's money, the last thing we want to do is be testing it live, throwing it out there and just hoping it doesn't break. So testnet allows us to have this protected environment where we can, Chocolate said, we'll do it live. And yes, that is the opposite of what we want to do. So instead we do it on testnet. We operate with testnet coins, which are essentially fake grid coins. They're grid coins in the same sense of how they're distributed, proof of stake, proof of research. The amounts are all the same, but it's fake. You can't transfer mainnet grid coins to testnet, and you can't transfer testnet coins to mainnet. They have no value, and we essentially call them funny money because that's what it is. It's monopoly money. It has no value. So in this way, we can test, and if something goes wrong, people lose coins or an exploit's found or something like that, no one is really hurt at all, if only, in their number of funny money they have. So we also use Testnet to test things that we want to know about the production network but can't necessarily test live. Things like how many transactions can you fit in a block? How many messages can you send to a wallet before it reaches a certain size? These are obviously things you wouldn't want to test on the main net because it would increase the blockchain size, which would negatively affect everyone. And also it would increase the mempool and our transaction count on mainnet, which would never be a good thing. So we do all this stuff on Testnet, amongst other things, with a dedicated group of testers that know the ins and outs of the wallet, and we test releases usually off of the development and staging branches of the Gridcoin repo. Now, if you're not familiar with our GitHub, we have 4 branches. Development branch is where all work starts out. Development branch is where issues are fixed, things are put together, and everything comes together in development. When development is considered mature, it moves to staging. Staging is what the name suggests, staging for production. Third branch is Hotfix. Hotfix is only used for emergency fixes in the most cases, like during the recent fork apocalypse, we used Hotfix a lot because it allows us to get things to the final branch, master, quicker. Master is what the final release is built off. And when things are pushed to master, they are essentially good to go for everybody to use on the main network. So we primarily test with staging, although there are times that we do test with the development branch as well. It really depends on what the current testing priorities are. And of course, those are always changing depending on what the development team wants us to be testing and what has been put in. And also how frequently a build has been done. If a build hasn't been done in a while, we'll usually build it off staging, because staging generally is slower to update than development, which is changing at a usually several times a day pace. Anyone have any questions or anything real quick?
So you're working with developers who come to you with problems that are like, hey, is this going to screw something up? Or is it just new code that's put through and all that stuff? It sounds like you're working with both.
And yes, in most cases, it's both. We will have a set of changes that are moved from dev to staging, and we'll test them, thoroughly. We'll have all the commits that were done and see all the changes and say, okay, we need to test all this before it, we're comfortable saying this can go out to master and be released as a release. But in addition, we do also have developers come to us directly. Usually me as the coordinator, and I then distribute resources appropriately. I'll give a good example. Just a couple days ago, one of our developers, iFox, came to me with some neural net fixes, and he wanted to test them with, obviously they need to be tested with Windows users. So I went into the Testnet channel in our Slack, and I gathered a few Windows testers, and we tested the fixes, and that was just done like on request. It wasn't something that was in yet. He hadn't put it into development yet because it wasn't ready. He wanted to verify that it worked. And in this case, especially with the neural network being a massive mesh of many, many computers coming together to form consensus, just testing it on his own machine was not enough to verify it worked. Through testing with multiple people, he could say, okay, there's an issue here, or this is fine and ready to go. So it is both. We do specific and also just general.
It sounds like you got 3 prongs there. So you've got the production that's already there, and then you're kind of stress testing the protocol as it exists. Like you're talking, how many transactions can we do in a block, and like what can the network sustain, but we don't want to test that on live, so you test that on testnet. And then you're there also testing just approved pull requests, approved code developments as they get put onto staging. And then you're also there as like a resource for developers to come to you who have like developed something they don't want to put onto the development branch yet. They just want to sort of make sure it's ready to get there because they need a couple more eyes on it with a couple more computers working at the code, make sure it works.
Yeah, you really hit the nail on the head there. That's a really good summary of what we do. Yeah, I would say it is three-pronged in that way. So the next point was, how can normal users get involved in testnet? If what I've described to you sounds interesting or sounds like something you'd want to do, if you have, pretty good knowledge of Gridcoin or blockchain or cryptocurrencies, how they work, not saying you need to know how the code works or need to be a, star C++ programmer. The only thing we usually ask is that you have a, pretty good understanding of, how the wallet works and such, the basic concepts. To get involved, we run testnet generally. Our main communication platforms are Slack and Rocket Chat. I make sure everything that goes into the testnet Slack channel is mirrored over to Rocket Chat, though it is primarily done in Slack, but we have a bridge to move everything over. Of course, everything doesn't always get moved over, and then I have to manually go over and curate it. But you can use either of those platforms. Slack, you need an invite, but you can ask anyone here, or really anyone on Reddit, anyone, just a lot of people have access and can invite you to the Slack, and you just need an invite code and then you're into that. Or Rocket Chat, you do not need an invite link. You just go to gridcoin.rocket.io, and that you just need to make an account, and then you can access the Rocket Chat, and you just have to find the testnet channel. And like I said, everything's mirrored over. Diogo asked, Slack Matrix Rocket Bridge. No, at this time we do not have Matrix or Riot Bridge. We just use Slack and Rocket. We did used to have a testnet channel on Discord here, but it was really hard to coordinate 3 channels. It's hard enough with 2, so we try to kind of keep it sort of centralized in a way, just because of the amount of coordination that goes into testnet. Because generally on a weekly basis, we're saying, here's a new build, here's a new testing release to work with for your platform, here's our testing priorities, basically go. So we kind of need it to be in an easy place for the people like me and for the builders to put in one central place, or in this case, 2 places. So any questions on that?
I actually do have a question. So let's say somebody wants to come along and test a new feature. So I mean, just going to like a kind of extreme example, but one that I'm familiar with. So let's say we wanted to implement some, flop to GRC proposal, and we'd actually have to we want to test it on a testnet to see, who gets what, is it manipulable, etc. Blah blah blah. How much effort is required on the part of the person who wants to do the testing, and how much effort is required on the part of everyone else? And also, who do we have to go through? Who do we have to contact specifically? I mean, I'm assuming it's you, but what's the procedure?
Well, if you had a solution that was like coded already? Is that specifically what you're talking about, or something that's like a theoretical kind of thing?
I'd say, like, let's say somebody came along with, like, I had something already, coded up, ready to go. Let's test this.
Yeah, then it would need to be submitted as a PR to the GitHub, and assuming it's accepted, reviewed and accepted, it would go into the development branch, and it would be tested depending on how important it is, or how big it is, I guess, in scope. It could be, and probably would be, tested separately from other changes. Like, we would make it our testing priority for, a certain time period, maybe a few days, maybe a week, maybe two, depending on the scope, to say, hey, everyone on Testnet, let's use this build. We're going to test this, for your example, Gridcoins to flops, and see, poke holes in it, see what we can find. So you would be going through the GitHub for, your code, but in terms of specific testing requests, they could always be sent to me, or really just the Testnet channel in general on Slack or in Rocket. Yeah.
I guess another question. So, is it possible to test two things at once? So, like, is it possible to have like two different branches of the blockchain that we're testing two different things on, or how does that work?
Yes, frequently on Testnet, we have people intentionally running multiple versions because we want to make sure things are not, conflicting. So on Testnet, a lot of people are obviously going to be running the newest thing we're testing, the most recent patch or PR that was put through. But we also have a lot of people that are running, for instance, currently 3.7.11.0. The vanilla master release, the patch that was released, I guess it was about a month and a half ago now. So we want to make sure, that the new version is going to play nice with the old version, and they're not going to, interact in ways we didn't foresee. We also have people, that maybe aren't on the bleeding edge up to date, but are running maybe a patch from a week or two ago. And it's the same principle. As long as it's not a hard fork mandatory change, which 90% of the time we're not testing, there's no problem for multiple things to be tested at once. It just comes into play where you have issues that are so big in scope or so important that they need to be tested separately, that happens sometimes. A good example will be when the CBR poll that is currently running ends. We will begin testing on Testnet CBR. That is massive in scope and requires a mandatory. So in that case, it would be all hands on deck, everybody running CBR, everybody running this code, because if you're not, it's a mandatory and you're going to fall off the chain. But most of the time, yes, there are many different clients running many different things at once.
Great, thank you for the explanation.
Anything else? Okay. Next, I was going to get into the specifics of running a testnet node. So we distribute first I should start this by saying you should start these procedures after you get into the testnet channel on Slack or on Rocket. You'll find a lot of resources in there. They're all pinned to the channel that will show you guides, will show you Testnet Explorer. We do have a block explorer for Testnet. Shout out to NeuralMiner for that. Thank you. And we just have a lot of resources there in one place that's easy to get to. There's also a page for Testnet on the Gridcoin wiki, wiki.gridcoin.us. There is a page, if you search for Testnet, that has a lot of the information I'm about to say, but not all of it. With Testnet, the easiest way to run Testnet is to simply launch your normal wallet with the parameter -testnet. Now, a lot of people aren't familiar with the way to launch with a parameter. If you're launching it on Linux or really any system where you're launching from a command line, it's simple. You just put it after the file you're launching. On Windows, you can create a shortcut, and in the shortcut target, append -testnet to launch with that parameter. So what will happen is the wallet will start up, read the testnet parameter, and create its own file directory. Everything in testnet is contained within a folder called testnet that's inside your normal Gridcoin directory. Inside this testnet folder is essentially what looks like a cloned version of the exterior, the regular Gridcoin folder. It's got all the things you'd expect. Your testnet has a wallet. It's obviously got a blockchain file and the level DB folder associated with it. It's got a configuration file. This is what's critical. On testnet, we need specific configuration flags to make sure your client is running as well as it can and that we're able to monitor it and check network health. Because on testnet, it's very important that we know who's running what, when they're running it, if they've fallen off the chain, if they've forked, if they're having problems, and how many blocks they're staking, that sort of thing. So the main way we do this is with a flag in the configuration file called the org flag. The org flag stands for organization. It's a flag that we don't use on mainnet, and do not use this flag on mainnet because it will be easy to see and you will get yelled at. But on testnet, we require that everybody run with this org flag set. So in your configuration file somewhere, your testnet configuration file, you want the line org equals and then something related to your username, basically something that we can identify as you. It can have anything in it as long as it's letters and numbers. Just as long as it's something we can identify as you. Just don't put it like something really weird or inappropriate or anything, or we'll yell at you. And we use those orgs through various tools, but namely block stats, which Jay Ringo uses frequently for the state of the network reports. But on testnet, we use them on a more than daily basis, usually several times a day, checking block times, checking how big the blocks are, if the target times are correct, if the blocks are coming in at 90 seconds, and super block times, and also what percentage of clients are staking the blocks. How many of the newest client, how many of the last 100 blocks were staked by the newest version we're testing client is an important thing. We also look at what orgs are staking the most, what CPIDs are staking the most, things like that. There's a lot of other important flags to include in the testnet config file. I'm not going to go through them all, but on the wiki testnet page and in the Slack and Rocket pin files, there are sample configuration files for testnet. These sample configuration files are meant to kind of be plug and play. You can copy and paste them into the directory, change a few variables here and there, and all the information is written into the file. It has comments telling you what each flag does, whether it's necessary for your system. Some are, Linux specific, some are Mac specific, so on. And you just comment out the things you don't need and follow the instructions for the things you do. If you have any questions, obviously you can ask in the aforementioned channels. People are happy to help. So that's your basics for how to run testnet. We usually distribute specific testnet builds in Slack and Rocket, and also on the Linux PPA, the staging repo, not the normal stable release, but the staging release of the repo if you use Linux. Does anyone have any questions about getting started on testnet? No, it's pretty complicated.
Do I need to, or can I run both my production wallet and a testnet wallet on the same computer at the same time without setting up a VM or anything?
That is a very good question, and I'm glad you asked that because I almost forgot about that. Yes, you can run a testnet client on the same machine as a mainnet client. You can run them both right next to each other if you want. I was doing that earlier today. They use different ports. So your mainnet client and your testnet client use a port. They're just one port apart, but to your router, they're completely separate. They don't affect the same directories because they're in different folders. And yeah, there's no problem with that. The only problem is if you're running multiple testnet clients on the same router. Like let's say you have 2 computers on the same like Wi-Fi or local area network. Usually then you'll run into a problem because if you use UPnP or the default port, your router obviously can't route 2 computers through the same port. So what you need to do then is if you are running 2 testnet clients on the same network, one of them has to be set to a non-default port and have UPnP turned off, which is turned on by default. So you have to turn that off. That's in configuration as well. All those settings are in the config file and in the examples that I outlined. It is worth noting if you run a non-default port, you cannot accept incoming connections. So you will not be able to run 2 full nodes on the same network. You could run 1 testnet full node, but the other one will only do outbound connections because it's on a non-default port.
Awesome, thank you.
Any other questions about setting up testnet?
I got a question for.
Okay.
If I am someone who's not tech savvy, but I still want to participate in this, like I don't know what you're saying when you say UPnP, UDNP, all these letters. Can I still participate in this? Do I just need to get on Slack? Will I screw up my production wallet or put myself at risk?
Well, we like to have people who have, a fair grasp, but that doesn't mean you have to know everything. Obviously, you don't need to know how, UPnP works or the exact staking algorithm of the wallet. You don't need really high level knowledge. You just need to know enough that it's helpful for us testing. The main priority for us on testnet is we want to be able to identify what's a bug and what's maybe someone not doing something right. We can usually point that out. So as long as you're comfortable running the wallet and not running into problems with the normal wallet, that are kind of troubleshooting questions, then we're happy to have you on testnet. Any questions are usually answered very quickly, and we are a welcoming bunch. I don't want to make it sound like, it's this exclusive club for people who know, the top knowledge about the wallet. We are always welcoming more people because the more testers you have, the easier it is to find problems and the easier it is to scale to production levels. The easier it is for us to essentially simulate traffic levels and block production transactions equal to mainnet, which ultimately is our goal. We want testnet to be as close to mainnet as it can be without putting mainnet at risk. In regards to your point about damaging your mainnet installation or your mainnet wallet, if done properly, the steps outlined that I outlined and also the steps outlined in the guides and the pinned files, there's no risk to your mainnet wallet because it's all in a separate subdirectory of the Gridcoin research folder. However, if you make mistakes along the way, critically, if you don't launch the wallet with the testnet parameter, you can possibly do damage to your mainnet blockchain. It wouldn't do damage to your wallet, but it might do damage, it might corrupt your mainnet chain by overwriting it with testnet blocks, which is why it is critical and very important that you always launch your testnet wallet with that testnet parameter, because if you don't, it will not end well. Your wallet will, the best case scenario would be your wallet would crash and not cause damage.
I wouldn't lose my coins. I'd have to re-download the blockchain, right?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. You wouldn't, you'd risk blockchain or level DB corruption of the chain. You wouldn't, your wallet file is safe and you should be backing it up anyway. It's a good point. Good time to point that out. Everyone should always back up your wallet.dat and your gridcoinresearch.conf files at all times in case, like J Ringo was saying, something bizarre happens and you lose it or your computer dies. It's always good to have a backup. But no, testnet itself barring some catastrophic failure in the code, would not in and of itself cause a loss of coins on mainnet, because it doesn't touch your mainnet wallet at all. It has its entirely separate wallet with entirely separate addresses.
Hey Barton, well, this is complicated, but before I forget, I think I read somewhere that if you've like encrypted your wallet, then when you back up your wallet, you want to have backed it up from when it was unencrypted, or something like that. Is that correct?
That's actually the opposite. If you have an unencrypted wallet and you back it up, and then you encrypt your wallet and you lose it, you're going to have a bad time. Because when you encrypt the wallet, it inherently changes the structure of the wallet.dat file. This kind of goes outside the scope of testnet, but I'm happy to answer this question. You always want, obviously you always want to be backing things up, frequently. I would say weekly. If you're paranoid or have a lot of coins you don't want to lose, or just feel like you can do it more often. Some people do it daily, I know. But you really want to make sure you're backing up. And no, if it's encrypted, you don't want to back up an unencrypted version. And if somehow you had an encrypted version and unencrypted it, you don't want to do that. I don't even know how you do that, but you don't want to do that either. So yeah, you always want to back it up.
Okay, so if I encrypted it and I back it up, and I want to rebuild it onto another computer, will I have a problem?
As long as you remember the password you encrypted it with, you will have no problems.
Okay, and theoretically speaking, not that I would ever do this or something like it, but suppose theoretically I wanted to back up my wallet on a cloud. Yes, I know it's a terrible idea, but theoretically, yeah, go ahead.
Well, that in and of itself is not a terrible idea as long as it's encrypted with a very, very strong password, right? Because when you're putting it in the cloud, it's out there and someone could hack it and get it, and you want to make sure at the very least it should be encrypted. You do not want an unencrypted wallet backed up on the cloud, because then anyone could just grab that wallet.dat, put it in their client, and they have your coins. But by encrypting it with a very strong password, you can store it on the cloud. It's really up to you and how comfortable you are with your cloud service, how safe you think it is, and how, I guess, how paranoid you are. But given a strong enough password, I don't see a reason why you would be at risk doing that, because frankly, to someone who's hacking a cloud service, getting all these files, I would think a Gridcoin wallet that's heavily encrypted with a really strong password would be just not worth their time. But maybe that's just me. But always back up. That's the message I want to give. Doesn't matter where you back it up, just make sure you have backups, and preferably multiple.
So I actually am backing up right now.
See, I'm helping already.
So actually, what I was considering doing, I'm glad you said that, because what I was I realized we're really off topic. I'm sorry, Jaringo. What I was considering doing was, like, because yeah, I am very paranoid, hashing all of the all of the my wallet dat and my config dat. Yeah, exactly what Snipatomic is saying. With a long password that's only in my head. That's actually exactly what I do. I design algorithms to design my passwords. And then so I'd hash those files with a hash function that only I know, and then I back those up, and then obviously you secure that with a password. But even if someone gets past those, faults, gets past those doors, they'll just come to a hashed wallet dat and config file that they can't use because they don't know the reverse hash function. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, and ENM said it in the chat that they use Veracrypt, and that's another option. You can use encryption software to encrypt it before you put it on a cloud service, and you can use all kinds of encryption with Veracrypt, and at that point it is well beyond the capacities of pretty much anyone that's going to get access to that wallet file to try and crack that. And if they manage to crack that, to then crack the wallet itself, it's just you're adding locks on locks on locks, and it's how much trouble is the attacker going to go to is the question.
So that makes it easier. I mean, just like for international, because like there's one thing, like say I want to travel or something, or take an extended vacation, and I want to be able to take my wallet anywhere with me. This would be a very good idea. If I don't want to carry around a flash drive with me, which has security faults of its own.
Yeah, that is a good point. A very well encrypted cloud backup would be better than just carrying around a flash drive with it. Certainly.
And so when you say backup often, why is it important to do it often? Is it like how often does it change?
Okay, so this depends on knowledge of how change addresses work. But when you send Gridcoin to somebody, if you send an amount that's not the full UTXO unspent transaction output, we kind of went into this last week with Jem. If you send an amount that's not a full UTXO, the amount you choose gets sent to the receiver, and some of it, the change, comes back to you in the form of a change address. Your wallet will, unless you already have a change address for that sub-address, but that's more complicated, will create a new address inside your wallet that is a change address that holds the output, the UTXO of that transaction. So as an example, Chocolate, let's say I have 15 Gridcoin and I send you 5. Out of one UTXO, I have one UTXO containing 15 and I use it to send you 5. 5 Gridcoin gets sent to you. 10 Gridcoin comes back to me in a new address, a change address. So now the coins are not in the address they started in. They're in a new address that's still mine in my wallet, but with a different public key, a different address, obviously. So your previous backup would not have knowledge of that change address. So the best advice usually is to back up every time you perform a transaction. In a lot of cases, if you're sending a lot of transactions, that's not feasible. And for those people, they usually back up once a day or, a couple times a week, something like that. But if you're not sending a lot of transactions, that might not be a concern to you. So it really depends on how often you're sending transactions. That's really the determining factor in how often you should back up. The other key thing is the configuration file. If you re-advertise, delete, or anything happens to your beacon, meaning your proof of research beacon, that is in your configuration file. So you want to make sure your configuration file has the most up-to-date information on your beacon. So if anything changes with the beacon, obviously you want to back up that configuration file. ENM said, what if you just regularly send coins to yourself? That's a bit of a tricky one because it's hard to tell. The wallet kind of has a mind of its own with these sorts of things. You can, to some degree, predict what's going to happen, but not in all cases. Sometimes the wallet will create change addresses when sending to itself. It's kind of counterintuitive, but it's just the way it operates. So just to be on the safe side, the best practice is to back up anytime a change address could be generated, meaning anytime a transaction is sent. Now, staking is not an example in this case. When you stake, the coins come right back to the address they were staked from. So a new address is not created. I'm talking transactions as in you send coins to someone, someone sends coins to you, you send coins to yourself, you vote, you send a beacon, which falls under the configuration I was just saying. Any of those sorts of things would be an example.
Is this how it works for all, or like roughly how it works for all blockchains?
This is how it works for most Bitcoin-derived blockchains. Obviously, chains, I can't speak for different chains, but most chains that are derived off Bitcoin Core, as we are, function in this way with change addresses, yes.
What about, I mean, what about Ethereum? Is that also, I don't know enough. Is that a Bitcoin derivative?
Well, first off, Ethereum, no, is not a Bitcoin derivative in the code sense. It's written in an entirely different language. I do not know enough about the inner workings of Ethereum to say for certain whether they utilize change transactions. That would be something you'd have to look up. To be honest, I don't know.
Yes, it's been going on for a bit because this is a very important subject, but let us come back to the testnet. Let's wrap up testnet, and then we can, if we have time at the end of the podcast, because we are running short, we're almost at an hour, then we can come backing up. But there are a bunch of episodes out that do cover backing up, and we'll probably come back to it at a later date.
Okay, so the last thing I wanted to cover, and this was actually Diogo brought this up in the chat. He asked, is there a testnet Docker image? That's a really good question because that's actually one of the things that we would like to see in the future. We have a lot of plans for what we can do with testnet in the future, and we have kind of different priorities. And obviously the testing comes first, but we want to get these new features to improve the onboarding and make it easier for new people to get involved. One of those is a Docker, VirtualBox, any kind of thing like that, image that someone can just download and run, and they don't have to do all this setting up the configuration file, maybe downloading a snapshot, any of that stuff. It's just a package that's there and they can run and do it. There were even talks of integrating perhaps a Boink project that rewards users for running Dockerized testnet clients. Now, the fine details of that would require a lot of work, and I'm not saying that's going to happen in the near future, but that is something that could be done in the future. Other plans in the more immediate future is we want to create a faucet for testnet. One of the biggest barriers is when new users come to testnet. Obviously, you start out with your wallet with 0 coins in it, which isn't very helpful if you want to stake. And usually you can post in the testnet Slack or Rocket and say, hey, I'm just starting out. Can someone give me some coins? And people will throw, 1,000 at you or 10,000. Sometimes some of the bigger whales will even throw like 25, 50,000 coins at you because, again, it's fake money. It doesn't really matter. So it's not as big a deal. But we want to set up a faucet, which would be a website we would just direct new testnet users to. It would be part of the guides. And you would put in your testnet wallet, and it would spit out a bunch of testnet coins for you. And that way we could eliminate that whole having to ask, essentially beg other testnet users for coins. Immediate plans for testnet, depending on when you're listening to this recording, we're probably testing it now. CBR, once it passes, will be on testnet. V10 is CBR, and in the future we may be testing possibly some of the proposals that are being discussed today on GitHub, Reddit, the various platforms, manual reward claim, superblock claim, any of those sorts of proposals. All those things have to be tested very, very thoroughly to find any possible bugs, implications, for average users on testnet. And that is our goal, and that is what we do. So that about wraps up what I was going to talk about. If you're interested in testnet, just go to the Slack or the Rocket chat, go to the testnet channel and follow the guides. If you need help, we'll be happy to set you up. And that's it.
Awesome. So you said you had about between 50 and 100 people on testnet right now?
Yeah, it varies. It's hard to tell because we have a lot of people that maybe aren't always online, or maybe their wallet is down or something, but it's generally between 50 and 100, yeah.
How many was it last year?
Less than 20, probably less than 15. Yeah, we've seen massive growth in testnet, and that's why I'm the coordinator now, because it got to the point where we had so many people that we needed someone to kind of rise above the madness and say, hey, this is what we're doing. We need to all do this and focus on this priority, because it was taking time out of the developers' time to guide the testers. So that is essentially my role as a sort of liaison between the development team and the testers. I do test myself, but primarily I facilitate others testing the newest things that need to be tested as directed by the core development team.
Awesome. Yeah, that speaks to how much Gridcoin has grown in the past year, and how much people have gotten interested in wanting to make it work better and more smoothly, and that people have just they flocked to testnet. And there have been times where it almost seems like it's a little overwhelming. Like you're there, like 50 to 100 people trying to get this stuff all organized. And I expect, especially if you at some point have this Docker image that you were talking about, that and because you said that you want testnet to mirror production net as closely as possible, you almost want more people to come in. So if it's easier to participate in testnet and you're out there actively trying to get people to come on testnet, it's only going to come even more crazy in terms of management, but also better in terms of getting all the bugs worked out before major updates get released. And is that part of the plan, to really get more people into testnet eventually?
Yes, it is. You bring up a good point. It is a major balancing act between, you don't want too many people that it's too hard to direct them all to a certain goal. You don't want to, get drowned out amidst the chaos. But at the same time, you want as many people as you can reasonably direct, because the more people, the more eyes on it, the more wallets poking and prodding at the newest changes, the more likely we are to find problems. In a lot of cases, problems, bugs, weird bugs that make it to production skipped through testnet because it was some weird edge case that we couldn't cover, or it involved maybe hundreds of people or even thousands of people to trigger the bug, and we just simply couldn't. So in a lot of cases, yes, it is a finely tuned balance. At the current time, we're looking for more users. It may reach a point where we say, okay, that's enough for now, but as of right now, we would like more users, so we're always welcoming more. And it has not reached that point yet where it is crazy and unmanageable.
Cool. So this ties in nicely with the conversation we had, I think it was last week, about contributing without coding. If you have that base knowledge that Martin was talking about of just how to work your wallet, more or less, then come join the testnet, meet some cool people, and be part of the team. And you don't need to code a line in your life.
Yeah, I would say it's probably one of the biggest contributions you can make without coding to Gridcoin development, because you are actively testing and essentially your quality assurance. You're making sure everything's right and the way it should be before it goes out to everyone else. How Nixit asks, is anyone using a bot on testnet to generate transactions? Yes, we do have at various times different bots, scripts running to generate volume, to generate transactional volume to mirror production, because you can say on production the average amount of filled blocks is X, the average block size is Y, and we can replicate those with finely tuned bots or scripts. Generally, they're run by me or someone delegated by me. We don't generally like to see random people just running scripts. I mean, if you tell us ahead of time, that's fine. It is a test environment. We just want to make sure those scripts don't like slip onto production, because that is obviously a hazard. But yes, there are definitely times when we run load tests, when we run transactional volume, yes.
Cool. Are there any other questions for Barton? Awesome. Then I guess we'll wrap it up here. That was a great walkthrough, Barton. Thank you so much for doing that. It's going to be very useful in the future for people who are looking to come in to Gridcoin and really get involved with Testnet, just understand what is going on in the back end. And just when I was here last year, I didn't even know there was a testnet or like these things were happening. I assumed as much, but it was so in the back. This really brings it out in the front. It's pretty nice to see. So I don't know what our topic is next week, but I think we will let Goblin in by then. So there will be 3 of us. Again, it'll be me, Chocolate, and Goblin. So keep an eye out for a post on what we'll be covering. And to the aside that we went on earlier about security, there is a Gridcoin Classroom topic or episode on Gridcoin security. We will probably also cover it in a future episode here at the Fireside, because it's a very important topic. But if you're curious about some of the stuff we were talking about, look up that episode of the Classroom. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but it's out there. And that will be it for us this week. So thanks for joining us, and we will see you next Thursday at 8 o'clock, 12 a.m., well, midnight UTC, right here in the Gridcoin Discord. Bye, everyone.